Welcome back. President Biden making a big push right now to pass his infrastructure package. He just met with 8 members of Congress from both sides of the aisle. But now, of course, he needs to actually try and get it passed, which he says he wants to do by the end of the summer. Let's go to NBC's Kristen Welker at the White House. Kristen, it's always good to see you. How'd the meeting go? And where is the White House's thinking on this? Clearly, they want to make a public demonstration that they are reaching out to Republicans, but I have trouble believing that, frankly, any of them will end up supporting it.
Good to be with you, Casey, and I think you hit the nail on the head. Look, there are some sharp divides here as it relates to this infrastructure package. You start with the fact that infrastructure is traditionally a bipartisan issue, and that's part of why you have the president, the administration saying, look, this is one of those packages that we should be able to get bipartisan support for. We are willing to compromise. That is a different tone, Casey, and it's worth pointing this out than the administration took when it was dealing with the COVID-19 package. So they're saying, look, bring us your ideas. That meeting you talked about lasted nearly 2 hours. There were a number of different ideas that were floated. Deb Fisher, according to our Frank Thorpe, suggested breaking the infrastructure package up into various pieces. Part of the opposition, though, that Republicans have, and this is where it just gets very difficult, is the fact that there's a lot in this bill right now. You saw some of the items that it's going to address, not just money for rebuilding roads and bridges, but other issues like affordable housing, manufacturing, R&D, job training. Those are some of the issues that Republicans are saying, hey, wait a minute, this is like throwing everything against the wall and trying to see what sticks instead of proposing a traditional infrastructure package. Now, the White House pushes back against that. They say this is all a part of a broader picture when it comes to infrastructure. The real sticking point, though, Casey, comes when you talk about how to pay for this. And of course, the president is proposing increasing the corporate tax rate. He told me last week he's willing to negotiate that, but it's hard to see that Republicans are going to agree to any increase in the corporate tax rate. So still a big divide when you think about this package. But the timeline, again, is this summer. So they do have time to keep talking, Casey.
They do, and we should always point out that Congress does really only operate when there is a very hard and fast deadline, so I doubt we're going to see anything significant until we get to that point. But Kristen Welker, thank you very much for that report. We really appreciate it. And also developing this morning, we're learning more about how President Biden is handling immigration. He is set to nominate Tucson Police Chief Chris Magnus to lead the Customs and Border Protection, as the White House just reached agreements with Mexico, Honduras, and Guatemala to help pump the brakes on migration at the U.S. border. Let's go now to NBC's Ayman Mohideen, who is on the ground in Guatemala City. Ayman, it's good to see you. Migrants have been fleeing from the places like where you are now to come to the U.S., and there's been a lot of talk about addressing the root causes of that. What have you been learning there on the ground?
Yeah, Casey, we've been asking that question to everyone we've been speaking to, from officials to experts, even to the migrants themselves and what they're dealing with. And the short answer to that really is twofold. You have to try and deal with the structural problems, the root problems, and most of that lies in the socioeconomic conditions in this country. And you also have to deal with the short-term problems, things like dealing with the pandemic and the economic fallout from that. Over the past couple of days, we've gone to some of the rural parts of this country, seen up close the devastation that natural disasters have created. We've seen the economic conditions. Children are malnourished, people making less than $2 a day. It's just very, very dire, to say the very least. And that is what's forcing people to make this choice between life and death. Stay here, they risk their kids starving to death, or make the perilous journey across Mexico to the United States and risk their lives on that trip. But it underscores how difficult the situation here is. And a lot of that also has to do with the government. There's rampant corruption, there's organized crime, there is narco trafficking, and it has made good governance in this country almost nearly impossible. And that's why people are losing hope and making the choice to get to the United States, Casey.
Well, Ayman, I know you had a conversation with the president of Guatemala. What did he have to say about it?
Yeah, this was a wide-ranging interview, and we asked him about a whole host of issues. You know, what he said to us is that he wants to create what is called a wall of prosperity, not walls to divide people. And it was interesting. I asked him about this agreement with the White House about surging troops along the Guatemalan border, and he said, quite frankly, this is something Guatemala does without the initiative of the United States. Obviously, it seems that they're not doing it effectively enough to slow what we're seeing in the U.S.-Mexico border. But listen to what the Guatemalan president said to me. Watch.
Y fue muy bien recibido por Casa Blanca.
Our idea was received well by the White House,
Estamos a Guatemala en un muro de prosperidad.
that we convert Guatemala into a prosperity wall. Physical walls don't stop people.
Pero sin embargo, los muros de prosperidad,
We've witnessed this.
si la gente tiene
But
trabajo,
prosperity walls
si la gente
do.
tiene salud,
If
si
the
la
people
gente
have
tiene
jobs,
educación,
health,
si la gente tiene
education,
vivienda y la gente
housing,
tiene seguridad,
and security,
no se va.
they don't leave.
So that's what he wants to do here in Guatemala, but he says he can't do that without the help of the United States, foreign direct investment, financial aid. And that's what's given people a moment of pause, because the concern among U.S. officials is that pumping money into the Guatemalan government, as it has in the past, $2 billion over 10 years, is probably going to get squandered. That money often gets siphoned off by corrupt politicians and other officials, and it rarely makes its way to the basic services that are needed in this country. So this is the dilemma. How do you address the structural problems when you're dealing with a government that in itself is facing so many security challenges, accusations of corruption, and all of the economic problems that are underlying this this surge that we're seeing across the region? Casey?
All right, Eamon Mohideen, thank you so much for your very important reporting today. We really appreciate it. Don't go anywhere. Good morning. I am Casey Hunt, filling in for Stephanie Ruhle. It's Tuesday, April 13th, and we're going to start with breaking news in the fight against coronavirus. This morning, we learned the FDA and CDC are recommending health agencies pause administering the Johnson & Johnson vaccine while they investigate because of concerns about blood clots among a handful of people who got the shot. I want to bring in NBC's Tom Costello right away to help us sort through all of this. Tom, this is, of course, news that for the millions of Americans who've already taken the J&J vaccine is likely very alarming. There are likely people who have appointments today. How is this going to affect the vaccination effort overall, and what do we know about how we got here?
So let's make it very clear. We are only talking about the J&J vaccine. We are not talking about Moderna. We're not talking about Pfizer. And those two actually are far more likely to be the vaccine you get. But in the case of the J&J vaccine, the FDA is now recommending a pause, as you recommended, as you suggested, on administering the J&J vaccine because of a very, very small number of people who developed blood clots as a result of taking, they think, as a result of taking this particular vaccine. It's a blood clot called a cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. And it happened, only 6 cases of it, we should say, in women between the ages of 18 and 48, and roughly 6 days to 2 weeks after they actually had the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The CDC is now going to gather together one of its advisory committees on Wednesday to look at the data, decide what they're going to do about it. But for people who have now received already the J&J vaccine, and remember, this is a one-and-done shot, right? You don't need to follow up, just one shot. If they develop severe headaches, abdominal pain, leg pain, etc., shortness of breath within a few weeks of vaccination, then they should immediately contact their healthcare provider. Johnson & Johnson is out with a statement today on this particular issue. Johnson & Johnson says at present no clear causal relationship has been established between these rare events and Janssen, that's the same company, Janssen's COVID-19 vaccine. It says we continue to work closely with experts and regulators to assess the data. Here's what the FDA tweeted out this morning. FDA and CDC have issued a statement regarding the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, according to the tweet, and we are recommending a pause in the use of the vaccines out of an abundance of caution. Now, listen, we've had about 7 to 8 million people who've now received the J&J vaccine, only 6 cases to their knowledge of a possible link. One woman, according to the New York Times, has died, one woman in critical condition. So this is a very, very small percentage of people who've experienced any kind of symptoms at all. But this is really, Casey, going to cause a problem because the Biden administration has been counting on this vaccine rollout to help get everybody vaccinated between now and the end of April, early May. This really now throws that timeline into question because they were counting on these vaccines. As you know, there's been a problem with the Johnson & Johnson supply chain anyway because of a manufacturing error in Baltimore involving about 15 million doses that had to be thrown out. Casey?
Well, and of course, that leads to potential concerns about vaccine hesitancy and other issues. Tom Costello, thank you. I know you're going to be reporting on this throughout the day today. But now, a former prosecutor in Brooklyn, New York. Gabe, good morning. How is the prosecution finishing up its case, and what are we expecting from the defense as we head into that phase of the trial?
Hi there, Casey. Well, the prosecution called 3 witnesses yesterday and told 38 witnesses that it has called now as this trial enters its 3rd week of testimony. We heard last from a national use of force expert from South Carolina who, like others, has said that George Floyd died because of Derek Chauvin's knee on his neck, because of the restraint, not because of underlying medical conditions and drug use. But before him, we heard from Philonise Floyd, George Floyd's brother, who gave an emotional account of his life and the relationship with their mother. We spoke with Philonise Floyd just after he left the courtroom.
It felt good because I finally got the chance to let the world know who my brother really was. He was always a great person to us. He inspired us in the household. We prayed together. One thing I can tell you is I have the understanding that if I keep pushing and keep fighting for justice, we will get it.
So again, Casey, the prosecution is expected to officially rest its case this morning. And then, as you mentioned, the defense will take center stage. It's unclear exactly how many witnesses attorney Eric Nelson will call. He had hundreds of witnesses on his witness list. But we do know that the judge doesn't expect it to last more than a few days. He's already told the jury to expect closing arguments on Monday. But as for what witnesses we could expect from the defense, Casey, we do expect a former chief medical examiner in Maryland to be called to the stand, as well as potentially a Minneapolis officer who testified earlier. But the big question, of course, Casey, will Derek Chauvin himself testify? And the two stories that probably will converge here midday. The families of Daunte Wright and George Floyd are expected to hold a news conference here at the courthouse later on today. Casey?
Well, and Charles, let me pick up right there because, of course, this has been the backdrop, the Derek Chauvin trial. Now, Daunte Wright is dead. We're going to see these two stories come together later on today. What impact does this have on the Chauvin trial?
I think it can have a significant impact, Casey. I think that in the wake of what we are watching unfold in the Chauvin trial, to have something like what happened to Daunte Wright happen just 10 miles away has a tremendous potential for impact on this trial. In terms of how the jury can potentially process this, it actually does not allow the defense to create a sense of this being an isolated incident or this being a mistake. What it does is it underscores the notion that policing in America, as it is for Black Americans, is deeply toxic and deeply problematic. So you see the systemic link between the problem that we have all been talking about over the past year, and for many of us much longer, around policing. And that link cannot be made more clear than what we have just seen in Brooklyn, Minnesota. I think for the defense, however, it may have provided an interesting blessing in disguise, in that the defense at one point did move to have the jury in this case sequestered, and that motion was denied. Now, with everything that is happening with regards to protests, with regards to people being angry, and the news being out there, should it come out that somehow the news of Daunte Wright's killing has impacted the jury, or the jury is aware of that news or becomes more aware of it, or seems to be influenced by it, that could, in the event of a conviction, create an appealable issue down the road. And so there's a sort of dicey, let's wait and see approach in terms of how this may play out.
Very important set of points. Gabe Gutierrez, Charles Coleman, thank you both very much. Coming up, welcome back. More now on that breaking news. The FDA is set to hold a news conference in less than an hour after it joined the CDC in calling for an immediate pause in using the Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine. The agencies say 6 people in the U.S. who received the J&J vaccine developed a rare disorder involving blood clots within about 2 weeks of vaccination. Let's go right to CNBC senior health and science reporter Meg Terrell. Meg, What's the latest that you're hearing? What are we expecting at this news conference, and how concerned should Americans be?
Well, at this point, what we are hearing is this is an exceedingly rare event, and no definitive link has been proven between the vaccine and these rare blood clots. What they have seen, according to this joint statement from the FDA and CDC this morning, is that there were those 6 cases, all among women, in more than 6 million doses of the J&J vaccine that have been administered here in the U.S. Now, we know that in Europe, they have been looking into similar issues with the AstraZeneca vaccine, and these two vaccines do use the same technology. It's not identical, but it's the same way, essentially, of trying to protect somebody from the virus. And so these do look similar. These are rare blood clots that have a specific profile that come with this rare clot and also a low level of platelets. And really what is happening this morning is that the FDA and CDC are saying pause these vaccinations with the J&J vaccine as we further investigate this situation. And we let doctors know to look out for this, because if somebody does come in after having this vaccination with this rare profile of a clot, they need to be treated in not the normal way you treat somebody with a blood clot. You don't use heparin here because that could actually be detrimental. And so we expect to hear from the FDA what more they know. It seems as if they've put essentially everything in this statement, but how this investigation will play out. We do expect to hear from the CDC tomorrow. Its outside committee of advisors will meet and discuss this in more detail. And so right now they're emphasizing it is extremely rare, but telling folks that within 3 weeks of vaccination, they should look out for things like shortness of breath, severe headache, and any abdominal or leg pain, and let their doctors know if they have it.
Meg, how concerned is Johnson & Johnson about this from the perspective of the company, and whether people, even if this pause is lifted and we resume giving this vaccination, that people will worry it's not safe?
Certainly, it would be a huge concern for a company to have a pause like this. They say that they are working with the regulators. They note that no causal link has been proven here between the vaccine and these events. But certainly, it's not something that any drug company wants to be associated with. And so the best thing will be for this investigation to play out, for the risk-benefit to be established, for people to really understand what the profile is, if there is any link here, the people for whom this vaccine should be indicated if there are any changes. And we have to remember the risk of COVID is very high for certain people in particular. And so that may play out. But Casey, from the broader perspective in terms of supply, we really are expecting a lot from Pfizer and Moderna. And so I'm not hearing a whole lot of concern that this is going to be a huge knock to the U.S.'s vaccination efforts, at least as of this point.
A little bit of good news there. Thank you very much for that. Let's bring in now global health researcher and infectious disease expert, Dr. William Haseltine. He is known for his groundbreaking work on HIV, AIDS, and cancer, and he is also the author of Variants. Doctor, thank you so much for being here. Let me just ask right off the top, what is your reaction to the news of this pause?
Well, it's concerning. We knew from the work in Europe with a similar vaccine that a number of countries have either stopped or paused and then resumed. They both use the same vector. It's called an adenovirus vector. I think the FDA's reaction, even though the syndrome is very rare, is in part conditioned by what they've seen abroad as well. Most people will do perfectly well. Some people are likely to have a problem. Whether this is causally linked to this vaccine is not necessarily clear, but it is linked to other vaccines. I should point out this is a problem worldwide because there are 3 major vaccines that use the same technology: the J&J vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine, and the Russian Sputnik vaccine. So all 3 are going to cause questions around the world whether this fundamental technology, use of adenoviruses, has this very rare effect.
So, Doctor, we know that this was blood clots that were reported with 6 women who had already received the shot. Is there something noteworthy about the fact that this is being found in women as opposed to men?
Well, the same thing has happened in Europe with the other vaccine. It's more prevalent in women. There are a number of issues that women have with autoimmunity, which this appears to be your own body reacting against one of your key elements, in this case, the platelets, which are responsible for clotting. This is a very unusual syndrome. It's never been seen with these kinds of vaccines, but it has been seen with anti-clotting factors. So some factors that are designed to stop clotting actually, in very rare cases, promote it. The good thing about them is there are known treatments for what are caused heparin-induced clotting. So there are treatments that are direct antithrombin treatments. So that's why people are now alert to the people who receive this vaccine. If they have the problems that were mentioned earlier in your program, they should immediately see a doctor to see if they can be treated with these effective treatments that work against this particular kind of blood clot.
So, Doctor, what happens next? How long does this pause last, and what do the FDA and CDC spend the next 24 or 48 hours doing?
They're frantically looking for more patients. They're looking to see if what the incidence of this type of disease is in people who aren't vaccinated and have the same demographic profiles. They're doing a lot of comparisons. When that was done in Europe, they found that there was an association. So whether that's going to be true here, I should point out that the rate of this problem in Europe seems to be, at least from preliminary indications, somewhat higher than it is in the United States. It's more like 1 out of 100,000 rather than 1 out of 1,000,000, which we have been seeing.
Very interesting. All right, Doctor, thank you very much for your time and insights today. We really appreciate it.
Public health officials getting ready to give an update on their recommendation to pause the J&J vaccine. This is a news conference that is just audio. It is not on camera, but we're going to bring it to you because it's really important to hear that perspective and to get some questions answered. As more and more states, even just in the last couple of minutes, are now coming out and saying they're going to follow that recommendation. They're going to not give the J&J vaccine to people for now. CVS, Walgreens doing the same. The FDA and CDC both say this pause is out of an abundance of caution. It is precautionary, they say. And keep in mind the context here. It's after six reported cases of a rare and severe type of blood clot in a handful of people who got the vaccine. That is 6 out of nearly 7 million people total who have had J&J. That company this morning saying the safety and well-being of the people who use Johnson & Johnson products is our #1 priority. And at this time, they say there is no clear cause between these rare events and their vaccine. So let's get right to it with NBC News medical contributor Dr. Natalie Azar. NBC's Mike Memley has that news statement in from the White House. Standing by on that, NBC's Maura Barrett is in hard-hit Michigan. And again, we are waiting for that news conference with the FDA, top CDC officials to begin any minute. Dr. Azar, perspective is so critical here. We're talking some almost 7 million vaccinations administered from Johnson & Johnson. You've got 6 rare clots that have happened here. Balance out what people need to know and the perspective that's important walking into this.
Right, Hallie. Good morning. Well, certainly this news is extraordinary. As you point out, think that I really want to reinforce to folks is that this is extremely rare. What we really want to know is, does the rate that we're seeing, 1 in a million, is that above what we would see in the background rate for these rare cerebral venous thrombosis events? This is very critical. And Hallie, also the question is, of these 6 individuals, were there any predisposing factors? These were women between the ages of 18 and 48. Were any of them taking birth control? Were they smokers? Was there anything inherently that would put them at a greater risk for developing a blood clot like this? These are the questions that we really would love to have the answers to. I'm not sure that we're going to get that with just 6 individuals affected. And while the number is small, and I do think that that's important, and for the vast majority of people, the benefit will very likely outweigh this risk. This is still an incredibly important outcome. If you are the individual for whom or to whom this occurs, this is significant. Remember, we are giving this vaccine to healthy individuals to prevent a severe illness.
There is a question of what this means as far as the rollout given this pause. And Dr. Azar, I want to go to Mike Memley on that. But quickly, Dr. Azar, do we know how long this pause could last? Are we getting any indication of the timeline here?
So, Hallie, what I anticipate will happen is that they will take a closer look at the cases here in the U.S. as well as the cases in the U.K. and in the EU, that occurred with the AstraZeneca vaccine to see if they can perhaps try to elucidate any potential risk factors. As you are aware, the European Medical Agency has, in different countries, made a recommendation to only administer the Johnson & Johnson vaccine to older individuals, and we may see something like that occur here. Again, it appears to be more predominantly in females as well as premenopausal females, again, indicating that there might be some perhaps hormonal or gender predisposition.
Dr. Azar, I'm going to pause you there. I'm going to ask all of you to stand by. We want to listen into that news conference, which has just begun with the country's top public health officials on this developing news.
Fully understand these events, and also so we can get information out to healthcare providers and vaccine recipients. Right now, I'd like to stress these events appear to be extremely rare. However, COVID-19 vaccine safety is a top priority for the federal government, and we take all reports of adverse events following vaccination very seriously. I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Peter Marks, Director of FDA's Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, for more information about these reports. Peter.
Thank you, Dr. Woodcock. Together, the CDC and the FDA are reviewing data involving 6 reports of a rare type of blood clot called cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, or CVST, in combination with low levels of platelets in the blood, called thrombocytopenia, in women ages 18 to 48 who presented with symptoms between 6 and 13 days after receiving the Johnson & Johnson or Janssen COVID-19 vaccine. Treatment of this specific type of blood clot is different from typical treatments for other types of blood clots, which usually involve an anticoagulant called heparin. With cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, heparin may be dangerous, and alternative treatments need to be given, preferably under the guidance of physicians experienced in the treatment of blood clots. Of the clots seen in the United States, 1 case was fatal and 1 patient is in critical condition. While we review the available data, out of an abundance of caution, the FDA and CDC are recommending a pause in the use of this vaccine in the United States. The FDA will revise the fact sheet for the healthcare providers administering vaccine and the fact sheet for recipient and caregivers for the Janssen COVID-19 vaccine to include this adverse event information to ensure that healthcare providers are able to make appropriate benefit risk determinations for their patients. I want to reiterate what Dr. Woodcock said. Right now, these events appear to be extremely rare. That said, COVID-19 vaccine safety is a top priority for federal government, and we take all reports of adverse events following vaccination very seriously. Healthcare providers who see people presenting to them with either a low blood platelet count or blood clots should establish whether or not the individual has recently been vaccinated in order to inform the appropriate diagnostic evaluation and management. Now I'd like to turn to Dr. Ann Schuchat, the CDC's Principal Deputy Director, to speak to further explain our decision and next steps. Ann?
Thanks so much, Dr. Marks. I know that the information we're providing today is going to be very concerning to Americans who have already received the Johnson & Johnson or Janssen vaccine. And I want to let you know what we're doing to learn more and to protect people in the meantime, and what you can do to be on the alert. As Dr. Marks mentioned, there have been 6 reports of a severe stroke-like illness linked to low platelet counts. And more than 6 million doses of the J&J vaccine have been administered so far. While these events are very rare, we're recommending a pause in the use of the J&J COVID-19 vaccine in order to prepare the healthcare system to recognize and treat patients appropriately and to report severe events they may be seeing in people who've received the J&J vaccine. This pause will also allow the CDC's expert committee to review the situation. The safety of vaccines and the safety of the American people is of the utmost importance to us. The ACIP, or our Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, is the CDC's independent scientific expert committee on immunization matters. We are scheduling for them to convene tomorrow to review the data we have on these initial cases. This will allow careful deliberation about what we know so far about these events and consider next steps given the current context of the COVID-19 pandemic in the United States and our broader immunization efforts. As a reminder, ACIP meetings are open to public viewing. Today, we're also alerting state health officials and other leaders in the states and cities, pharmacies, and other healthcare providers who are administering the vaccine to make sure that they know about the pause, and so clinicians know how to evaluate and report severe events after vaccination. Lastly, I know there are people who have gotten the vaccine who are probably very concerned. For people who got the vaccine more than a month ago, the risk of them is very low at this time. For people who recently got the vaccine within the last couple weeks, they should be aware to look for any symptoms. If you've received the vaccine and developed severe headache, abdominal pain, leg pain, or shortness of breath, you should contact your healthcare provider and seek medical treatment. Now, these symptoms are different from mild flu-like symptoms, fever, and so forth that many people experience in the couple days after receipt of the vaccine. Importantly, there are 3 vaccines available, and we are not seeing these clotting events with low platelet counts with the other 2 vaccines. People who have vaccine appointments with the other 2 vaccines should continue with their appointment. Our partners will be working to reschedule people who have the J&J vaccine appointment in the days ahead. This may be a bit bumpy. We want to make sure that we're getting the word out to the public and to our providers, but we do want to make sure that people who are scheduled to have vaccination will be able to get that when vaccines available. We're committed to following the science and ensuring transparency and to providing regular updates. We're going to tell you what we know when we know it and what you can do to protect yourself. And our intention is to update you in the days ahead. I know this has been a long and difficult pandemic and a very long year and a half, and that people are tired of the steps that they need to take and are keen to be able to be vaccinated. The steps we're taking today are meant to make sure that the healthcare system is ready to diagnose, treat, and report, and that you, the American public, has the information you need to stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Schuchat. At this time, we will begin the question and answer portion of the briefing. When asking a question, please state your name and affiliation. Operator will take the first question.
Thank you. And